All right, welcome back to the Quest for Success podcast. Thank you so much for tuning back in again. We've got a fantastic guest with us today, a very different perspective to the previous guests that we've had on. A lot of business people and entrepreneurs, but today we're very excited because we've got Duncan Lay on, and Duncan is an established writer, journalist, and a close friend of ours, and so we're really excited to get his perspective and hear what success means to him. So Duncan, thanks for joining us.
Okay, guys, thanks for having me.
Duncan, very nice to have you here, because I remember very first time I met Duncan. I don't know you even remember. This is probably 1991 or 92 at Newcastle University. You came to see Belinda, and I'm pretty sure you can't even remember me then. I say hi to you.
Yeah, Michelle had a lot of boyfriends back then.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't even going out with Michelle, or we were just friends, but I saw you come into Edward House, and then that's the first time I met you. Since then, not exactly like, once you guys got married, and after that, we obviously, Duncan is Michelle, my wife, and Dylan's mom's very close friend, like best friend.
Well, my wife Belinda's been best friends with Michelle since they were about 10 years old, something like that.
Yeah,
So,
and you studied together at the same school, right?
yeah, that's right. I was at the same school with Belinda and Michelle, just for the 1 year, but that was enough.
Only 1 year, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I came over from the UK.
Oh,
so
right.
You probably can't pick that from my accent because we couldn't afford an accent. I came over from the UK when I was 16 and spent a year in Sydney and then a year at Yamina High, which was the school of Belinda and Michelle, and that's how we met. And yeah, we've been it's been friends since. And it's funny, like, even though we don't necessarily see each other a lot, every time we see each other, it's like it was 2 hours ago.
Yeah, old friends.
Yeah, and it's just so natural and easy to talk to you guys. And I do appreciate you inviting me on. I mean, I know you were looking for a successful author, but he wasn't available, so you got me instead.
Come on.
Don't do yourself like that. You've done very well.
I mean, before we talk about your journey and what you've done, maybe we have a tradition. We ask a question. Right.
So our opening tradition on this podcast is we like to ask the guest, in today's day and age, what does success mean to you?
Yeah, see, success, I'm very much like you guys. I don't measure it by necessarily everything what you're doing as work, how much money you've got in the bank. To me, the ultimate mark of success is the family. Like I look at it, like when Belinda and I got married, and this is a story we've told a few times. We still had separate bank accounts then, and we had $10 between us.
Yep.
So the annoying thing is I can't remember whether one of us had $4 and one of us had $6, and we
Who had
can't
the $6?
remember who had the $6. But we had $10 between us.
Yep.
So we basically started with effectively nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
But it's like my parents, they both married 3 times and ended up dying alone.
Yep.
I've been married to the same person, to Belinda, for 31 years. Raising 2 children, like I've got 2 kids. I really subscribe to the theory that you guys talked about, and I guess it's a little bit of almost like an Asian theory, that you raise your children literally, in that you lift them up to your level of whatever you've achieved so far. You get them up to that level, and then you equip them with the tools and the education to let them then start climbing the ladder further and pushing on even further to areas that maybe you're not going to be able to reach in your lifetime.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's really important. I had my father was a bit of an interesting character. There was a film that Ben Stiller did called Walter Mitty, and it's based on a literary character called Walter Mitty, who is a fantasist who imagines himself as the hero in every situation. And my father was a lot like that. Like, I grew up hearing stories that he'd been a doctor, that he'd represented England in basketball, in cricket, in soccer, and it was kind of like anything that I could do, I was never going to be able to reach those levels.
Yeah.
And then it turned out that it wasn't actually true.
Yep.
Like, so he was a doctor. He'd done national service in the UK, and he'd worked in the medical section for a year.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you a doctor. You know, he'd trialed for a team, didn't make it. That doesn't make you a representative player. So I grew up thinking that I was never going to be able to reach those levels. Those were unattainable. And then later on in life discovered that it was all rubbish. He just made it up. and no matter what I said I'd done, he was able to counter it with something that he'd done that was even better.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really, really important. Like, I wasn't allowed to go to university. I was accepted into university.
Oh, wow.
But I wasn't allowed to go because they wanted me to get a job and bring money in. So I started working as a cadet journalist in 1990 and was getting, after tax, the amazing sum of $170 a week. But I had to pay them $50 of that in board. Because, well, he kept losing his job because he again, it was this fantasist thing. He'd tell people all of his wonderful qualifications and his wonderful abilities, and sadly didn't really back it up.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really, really important that both my children went to university.
Yeah.
It was really, really important that they never felt that there was nothing that I'd done that they couldn't do better.
Yeah.
And just the idea that basically if you know, success is a ladder and you're climbing that you raise them up, you literally get them to the point where they're basically on your shoulders, and then you say, okay, you're now adults, climb, go as far as you want. I've got you to this point. I don't know how much further I'm going to go. You go as far as you want, and you know, I don't know how far they will go. It's entirely up to them, and I don't want to put that pressure on them.
Doesn't matter. You create that environment, that foundation for them. So now it's up to them where they want to go, right?
Yeah.
So
you get that foundation, and that's huge. Those things are a huge succce.
that's a success
to
you.
me. And you know, when it comes to writing, I mean, it's something that I went to see the original Star Wars when I was like 7 years old, and to me it was then just called Star Wars, although your generation now calls it A New Hope, and it just blew my mind. And like I'd always been sort of imaginative, but that just went, man, I've got to start writing some stories. And then I started writing from that point. And if I don't write something, if I'm not creating something, then I actually start to feel down. And you need, I need that creative spark. So
Yeah. So Duncan, yes, we want to come back to Star Wars and we want to find out all that information. But before that, you know, for people that not know much about Duncan Lay,
that's a lot of people.
we wanted to know, like, what are your achievements? I know you wrote published number of books, and 9 books.
Yes.
Published.
Yes.
And then you're still working on some of the things. Can you share that? What
So,
your achievements?
Yeah, so I've had 9 books published, 6 with HarperCollins and 3 with Pan Macmillan. And I guess the greatest period of success was the third book of the first series, which was a Australian bestseller. It spent the whole month of release on the bestseller lists. And then the first book of the second series was also an Australian bestseller. Unfortunately, what happened in between those two series was the collapse of the Red Group, which was Angus and Robertson and Borders. And I'd worked really closely with Angus and Robertson and Borders with the first series, and they were huge supporters of mine. And this is where there's a lot of sliding doors moments, I guess, in people's lives, and you think, well, their business incompetence saw the collapse of two fantastic book chains. It wasn't the GFC, it wasn't the internet, it was the fact that they were really bad at business.
Yep.
They did this thing called competitive advantage, where they made their books 10% more expensive than everybody else.
Okay.
That's as a businessman,
that's a competitive advantage.
That's not really an advantage.
Yeah.
And the second thing was they didn't have a return system. So the whole thing is, a book comes out, you order 100 copies of it, you've got 3 months to sell as many as you want, and then any that you keep after the 3 months, the bookstore has to pay for, right? They weren't sending them back. They actually pushed the third book of my first series into an extra reprint because they had so many copies in their warehouse that nobody else could get any. And there was no way that they could physically sell them all. And so these things basically crushed their business, and it was incompetence. And when they went down, it really hurt not just mid-range authors like myself, but a whole lot of new authors, because the main difference between Angus and Robertson Borders and Dymocks is that Dymocks is a franchise, right?
Yep.
So the owner is the manager. It's their money on the shelves.
Yep.
So naturally they're going to be a little bit less risk averse.
Absolutely, yeah.
Whereas Angus and Robertson Borders, the manager was just getting a weekly paycheck from the company. So for them, they were more willing to take risks. So like, I'll order an extra 50 copies of that book and see if we can sell them. And so they were willing to take a chance on new and emerging authors that Dymocks is a little bit more reluctant to do.
Yeah.
So it changed the whole landscape of Australian authors and publishing. But yeah, I've had 9 published. I'm always working on more, and there's some irons in the fire that I'm hoping to have happen. And meanwhile, I guess my day job is I work for the Sunday Telegraph, which is Australia's biggest selling and best read newspaper, and I've been there for 20 years this year.
Wow.
So that's a lot, and it's been a lot of fun. Some of it's been absolutely crazy and a lot of hard work, but I've got a lot of pride in what I've been able to achieve there and stay there. Like it's when I say you need a day job, people say, "Oh, you're an author, you must be rich." And you go, no. Well, there's J.K. Rowling rich, and then there's everybody else. So, like my books there, those ones that are sitting there, you can go to the store and buy them for about $30.
Yeah.
Now, of that $30, $15 immediately goes to the bookstore. That's their cut. Of that $15, about $12 of that goes to the publisher. Of the $3, 10% goes to your agent, and then you got to pay tax on the rest of it. So ultimately, for every time somebody hands over $30 for one of my books, I'm lucky to see $2 of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in terms of how many hours you have to put into a book, I mean, you're talking about an hourly rate in the cents.
Yeah.
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 It's
commercially. I mean, it's not more. It's a more passion than making money. Right?
Yeah, but you just never know what will take off.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
right.
somebody once said to me that getting published is like winning the lottery, and becoming a full-time author is like winning the lottery again. See, like, like the thing is, you can't pick what's going to happen. Like George R.R. Martin, who's obviously the most famous fantasy author of today.
Yeah.
Like, he'd been a full-time author and a full-time writer, but on the success scale, I mean, he was known in the fantasy world, but he wasn't known in the wider world. Like, you'd probably say his early career success was maybe 3 out of 10 compared to the 10 out of 10 that it is now. He didn't hit it with Game of Thrones until he was in his 50s.
Wow.
So it's really only been in the last 20 odd years that he's gone through the roof. Likewise, like sometimes you don't even have to be necessarily a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
Like those 50 Shades of Grey books, which are universally been panned as not very well written, sold like you would not believe, and made, I think it was E.L. James, a lot of money. And then on the other end of the scale, you've got somebody like a guy like Richard Adams, who did Watership Down back in the 1970s, which is an amazing book. It's a brilliant book. It's been turned into 2 movies, but I don't think I know he's written one other book, but which sold okay off the back of Watership Down. I don't know whether he's ever written anything else. So, is it better to be just chipping away and using the classic cricket analogy, hitting a lot of singles, or is it better just to smash it out of the park and then you're out next ball type of thing?
That's it. Yeah.
So
Duncan, quick question. To write a book like this, what are you looking at? Like, how many hours that you have to put in, a one book?
Well, the first book I wrote was different because I didn't truly know what I was doing. The first one I had published, like I wrote it, and it needed a lot of rewriting, and also it was about 40,000 words too long. So basically, it takes you about a year
to write.
to write a book that size, which is 180,000 words.
How many pages in there?
That's about 550 to 600.
500 plus. Okay.
So it'll take you about a year, because the whole point is you don't just write the end and then think job done. What you got to do, like, I write it out longhand. That's my first draft, and then I type it up. That's my second draft, and then I genuinely get to work.
Yeah.
Now, Dylan, I know you love to work with wood. It's like working with a beautiful piece of wood. So each draft that you do, you're sanding it. So you're smoothing down areas, and then you're also polishing it. So you're bringing up other areas of interest through. And each time you do it, it gets smoother and more interesting. And the more and more you do it, the better it gets. Yeah. So it even comes down to the stage where you've got maybe a minor character and you pull out all the scenes that they appear in, and you go through those and you're trying to make that character just as interesting as one of the main characters, because you're always seeking, different people will find different things interesting. And so you're trying to appeal to as many people as possible and get them to fall in love with different characters. So it to me, I compare it to working on a beautiful piece of wood. And like the biggest mistake that budding authors make is they send something in too early. Mm-hmm. So they write it and they've gone through it maybe once or twice. Like, you need to go through things up to 10 times, maybe even more, to really make it as good as it needs to be. Like, each time you're going through it, you're maybe only improving it by 1 or 2%. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that could be enough to get you.
Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it gets a little bit easier the more you do it. Like this, the second book in that series, I guess in some ways is my favorite book because it was the first thing I've ever written knowing it was definitely going to be published.
Yeah.
So the first book I wrote it, I didn't know whether it would be published or not. But that landed me a 3-book deal.
All right.
All right.
And so the second book, like that was the most amazing experience, actually writing something.
That it's going to go published.
I know it's
yeah.
going to be in the shops.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was truly incredible. But yeah, it's like success, as we said, it's like you never know when it's going to strike.
Yeah.
Like that one book. I mean, George R. R. Martin, I think, it has written how he was working on, I think it was a TV script.
All right.
And it got to the pilot stage, thought it was going to get picked up, it got knocked back. So he was gutted, obviously. But then he sat down to write this book, Game of Thrones, and it took him into the stratosphere. And you never know when that one book
It's going to happen.
is going to happen. And then once that happens, everyone wants to go back and read all your other books.
Yeah.
You get people who write to you and say how much they've enjoyed your book and how and there's an amazing thrill.
Yeah.
But there's always like that question that says, well, why did my books not sell like 50 Shades of Grey? I know they've written better. They're completely different subjects.
Yeah.
You just don't know what is it that seems to make a book part of get on a crest of a wave and get picked up, and you don't know what it is. The publishers don't know what it is.
You just got to try and see.
You just got to try and see what happens, and you just got to keep writing something that you feel passionate about.
Yeah.
And to me, like I always, like children, always play a role in there, and it's the relationship between children and fathers and sons. It was interesting. My second series was really about the fathers and their children, like adult children, and I wanted my father to read that series because there was a lot of stuff in there in some ways about our relationship.
Yeah.
And like you have to put some of yourself into these characters, and obviously you turn the volume up to 11. So something that happened in your life was maybe 3 out of 10. You turn it up to 11 for the book because obviously that's much more entertaining. But I wanted him to read it, and he was actually dying when the third book in that series was coming out.
This is the first book?
No, this is my second series.
Right.
So, which are completely separate to these ones. And he was actually dying when the third and final part of that trilogy was coming out, and I got HarperCollins to print me up a
book,
an early version of it, so he could read it. And he tried. Well, he said he tried. He didn't. And then after his death, I discovered the first 2 books in that series, which I'd personally signed to him and everything, were still sitting on his bookshelf and they'd never been read. The spines were pristine. They hadn't been cracked at all. And I'd let him know that it was about fathers and sons.
Yeah.
And it was weird. I would have loved to have asked him why.
Yeah.
Was he scared? Why did he not want to see that?
Was he approving of like your going into publishing and like writing books?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, he did like that. He did also tell me that he'd written a lot of books that hadn't been picked up. I was like, okay, right. He was very good at that whole reflected glory thing.
Yeah.
So saying, oh, my son is a published author. And that type of thing, anything to make him look good. It was that sort of narcissism, I guess. But yeah, I would have loved to have had that conversation with him.
Did you
I never
actually
did.
tell what's in that book, or
No,
you want him to read it?
I wanted him to read it, and I wrote in the dedication to the first one there you'll notice some things, because the hero was called Sendatsu because it was a kind of a mashup of samurai meeting Vikings in a fantasy setting. And there was reasons for that. You'd have to read it to find out exactly what they are. And this podcast would go on for too long if I explained it all. But I in the dedication to him, when he bought it, I signed it to him, and I said, "There's some things in here that you'll notice, but I'm not Sendatsu, and you're not his father." But yeah, whether that was too much for him.
Maybe he intentionally thought that will create more emotions for him. Maybe that's probably a choice that he made. Maybe I don't want to read this.
Yeah,
and
it's a funny one. I mean, I'll never have the answer to that. I'll never know. I can only speculate. Maybe I shouldn't have written that in there. Maybe I should have just made him read it and then see what happened from that. But that's the children. Like my first book is dedicated to my daughter Gabby, because it's about a warrior who's sick of war. I suppose he's got the fantasy equivalent of PTSD, and he's through bad luck he ends up looking after this little girl with magic powers, and she changes his life completely. And so again, like, the little girl is not Gabby, and the warrior is not me, but there are things in there that were from our relationship when she was younger. Because for me, the whole thing about fantasy is there must be an element of truth in it, right? If you believe those characters are real and that you could meet them, sit down and talk with them, invite them on your podcast, then you can believe the fantastic elements that are going on around them. Like, you're more willing to accept that, okay, there could be magic, there could be dragons, whatever, if you can believe those characters are real people.
See, I love that, because I've never been much of a fictional reader myself, but I love that you're tying in some of your life lessons,
your experience,
your experiences into these characters to make it easier for other people to kind of relate to.
Well, that's the whole idea. You want to get these people you want to get your readers believing in these characters, because to get someone to read a trilogy like that, each one 180,000 words, 550 plus pages, that's quite a commitment. So you've got to get your hooks into the reader to get them to go on that journey.
Yeah.
So I mean, which is why it's nice to come on something called a quest for success. The quest is so often part of fantasy.
Yeah,
that's it.
And do you look at we often think about this podcast and think about how leveraged it is. We might sit down and talk for an hour, and then people all around the world will listen to this, and it might accumulate to so far 50 hours of listen time. So we've put in an hour of effort, and is that, I know you talked about there's a lot of effort that goes into these books. Do you ever stop and think about, as you said, these take ages to read. You've sat down for a year to, put this book together, but how much attention time you're getting from your readers?
Yeah, you really can't think too much about your readers when you're writing, because then you start second guessing yourself. Like, you've really got to write something from the heart, that's from you, that you really want to write. Like, writing is so personal, and it's so part of who I am. Like, my favorite fantasy author is a guy called David Gemmell. I've got all of his books, and I felt a connection to him because he came from East Sussex, which is the county in England that I'm from. He was a local newspaper editor. I was a local newspaper editor.
Oh, wow.
And then he wrote characters that weren't black and white. Everybody was infinite shades of grey. And it's a little bit of a tragic story because he was a smoker, like many, I guess, of his generation. And he had heart problems. And he was advised to give up smoking for his health. And he did, and then he discovered that he wasn't able to write. When he stopped smoking, he wasn't able to write. So he went, I would rather sacrifice years of my life and be able to write. So he took up smoking again, and tragically he had a heart attack and he died. And it was really ironic because he was notorious. He only ever wrote standalone books. The first time he did a trilogy, he died before he could write book 3.
Wow.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so his wife finished it off from the notes that he left. But it was, in one way, you look at that and you go, oh my God, that's so horrible, because his friends, his family have missed out on years of him. And yet a part of me, the writer part of me, goes, I can see that, because it would be a life without colour. It would be a dark life. There's no joy in it if you're not writing. Like, it's just, there's just something in you that says, I have stories there that I have to tell.
Yep.
And if I don't get them out, they're going to chew me up inside.
Yeah. So, Duncan, you're talking about fantasy novelist, right? So people don't really know because, to be honest, I read a lot of books, but more business-related books. That's what I kind of enjoy. This is more something that it's like
swords and sorcery.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings, and
Well,
that sort of
yeah. So Lord of the Rings is what they call high fantasy.
Okay.
With a full cast of singing elves and dancing dwarves.
Okay. Yeah.
This is more. It's more of a gritty humanist fantasy.
Right.
Okay.
So you don't have other races. It's like
So the human.
Yeah, they're humans, and they're recognizable humans.
Yep.
Like if you look at, I guess, at Lord of the Rings, and some of the characters of Legolas or something like that, you would find it very hard to imagine Legolas walking into the pub. But my characters, I want you to imagine that they could walk into the pub, and even though they might be dressed a bit differently,
Someone sitting next to you.
they're totally believable in that human way. And look, some people love that high fantasy and sort of really getting into that, and some people like that sort of more of a gritty fantasy where it's more human emotions, and like the battle scenes are real. I've got a very good friend who was in the Australian Army, and he doesn't read a lot of books. He read mine just because it was me, and he said that he couldn't believe the battle tactics, how real they were. And I took that as a massive compliment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because see that first series, one of the inspirations was this battle called Pilith. Now, I'm part Welsh, and only about 1/8 Welsh, but I really identify very strongly with that part of me. And Pilith was the battle where the last true Prince of Wales, Owen Glendower, nearly created an independent Wales. Because you guys probably know the story how Wales, that was the Welsh are the original inhabitants of Britain, and the Angles and the Saxons, who are now the English, pushed them out.
Yep.
So Pilith is really interesting because this English army, basically the Welsh were the best bowmen in the world, and this English army basically marched into Wales and marched into the villages and said to the Welsh, you're going to come and fight for us. If you don't, because we need your bowman skills, If you don't, we're going to burn your villages and your family's going to starve. So they gathered up this force of Welsh bowmen to take on the rebel Welsh, and they had a archery battle. And because Owen Glendower's forces were higher up on a hill, they were able to outshoot the other Welsh. Right? They had the advantage, and the other Welsh were forced to basically flee. So the English went up the hill, looked like they were about to win, and at that point, the Welsh who had been forced to fight for the English switched sides. And nobody knows why they did it at that point, because it looked like the English were going to win the battle. And they would have been on the winning side.
Mm-hmm.
If they were going to switch sides, why didn't they do it at the start? Why did they do it when everything seemed lost? And they changed the course of the battle, obviously, and won it for Glendower's forces. And that just fascinated me. And history has never really been able to answer why they changed sides when everything should have said, don't do it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to really explore that. And that was kind of like the starting point for me.
And is that where you get most of your inspiration from?
Yeah,
like, is
absolutely.
It
From
history?
from real things. The other thing that really inspired me was the story of Srebrenica, which I don't know whether you guys have heard. So this was this terrible massacre in the Balkan Wars where the Serbs surrounded a town which was protected by a Dutch battalion. So these Dutch soldiers were theoretically protecting these Bosnian Muslims, and the Serbs surrounded it and said, guys, either you surrender or we're going to blast you. And the Dutch didn't have any heavy weapons. Serbs had artillery, tanks, you name it. So the Dutch commander had a choice. He could either fight and die, at which point the Americans and the British and everyone would have rushed in and stopped what happened, or he could step aside and hope that the Serbs were going to do the right things by the Muslims. He chose to step aside. They massacred thousands of men and boys. And I read an interview with the commander of the Dutch battalion later on, where he said he and most of his men now wish that they had fought and died rather than live with the knowledge that they stepped aside and let the massacre take place. And to me, that was an incredibly powerful emotion, that you did something, you were put in an impossible choice. Like to lead to like these were men that he'd obviously worked with for years, to basically sacrifice them to save people that he didn't know, and to then years later be going, oh, I wish we had all died. Like to me, that was so powerful, and I wanted to put some of that in there. So these are things I'm inspired by so many things in history, because I guess the thing that makes me laugh about today's generation, you excluded obviously, mate, is the fact that everything is at your fingertips. There is so much knowledge there on, like, almost the entire sum of human learning is there if you just Google it and search for it. And yet they're quite happy to say, oh, some guy on YouTube told me this. Yeah, that's good enough for me. Some chick in a bikini told me that. I believe that. And nobody, I think there's an old saying that basically those who don't learn the mistakes of history are doomed to repeat it. And to me, it is so important to know context about everything that's going on in this world. And I just, there's so many things have happened throughout human history that are just incredible. And I just wanted to sort of put some of those into the books and, give it a little bit of a fantasy twist as well.
So you also mentioned, talking about inspiration, you also mentioned Star Wars.
Yes.
So what's the relation to Star
Well,
Wars?
Star Wars just blew my mind. Like this was this was something in the 1970s when I was a kid. There was just nothing like it, and I guess in a lot of ways, Star Wars: A New Hope has kind of created today's pop culture scene.
Yeah.
Everything's grown from that, and it just like the idea that people could go on a wild adventure and they'd like I don't do lasers, I don't do sci-fi, but yeah, that whole. I mean, I've read George Lucas's story about that, and there was a lot of samurai stuff that he put in there, and like there was many different. Like he was like a magpie. There was many things that he picked up from other cultures, but he tied it all together so beautifully. And yeah, it blew my mind. I guess it kick-started my imagination and that creative side of me, and it's never stopped. And I think that's one of the things that I feel a little bit sad that things are you're not asked to fill in the gaps as much these days. Everything is there for you. You don't have, your brain doesn't have to work to imagine things.
Yeah.
Like in the old days, a lot of the TV shows didn't have very big budgets for special effects or anything like that. So it was all about the characters, or they would show you part of an effect and your brain had to basically fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And now, of
Nowadays
course,
it's totally different.
totally different.
Yeah.
So imagination is a huge thing, and again, it comes back to success. Like I feel it's really important to stimulate that kind of imagination in my children, and just trying to get them to like not just look at something as like a 2D sheet of paper.
Yeah.
There's other like things. It's more like a dice where there's 6 sides to it. So look at it from different angles and see other points of view, and that's what I think is a little bit lacking. Particularly, Star Wars. I loved it. I've loved all of the Star Wars movies mostly. Number 8 wasn't that a big fan of. Like I kind of feel like since Disney took it over, they've there's an English expression, they've bottled it. They haven't, like they had, to me, the most interesting character in A Force Awakens was John Boyega's Finn, the stormtrooper that turned his back on the Empire. To me, that was so interesting. And then they wasted him for the other 2 movies. And like, were they too scared because he was black? Like, what was it that they didn't lean into that? Like, it's to like that. I just really was sort of saddened that they had this really interesting character and they didn't take him anywhere. And like we were actually talking earlier, I watched the first episode of The Acolyte, their new Star Wars show, and I was like, have they got AI to write this?
Yeah.
Because basically it's just like regurgitating all old characters. And the big spoiler alert, it's not that much of a spoiler alert because they tell you in the first 5 minutes, the big twist is that there's an evil twin. And you go, evil twin? How many times has that been done? Can't you?
So Duncan, that's a good point that you're making, right? So AI, right?
Yeah.
That's a buzzword. Everyone's in their mouth.
Can I just say, people that write books using AI, there is no pit in hell deep enough or hot enough for them. It is just destroying everything that writing should be about, which is a creative process.
Yeah.
Not just, I've had an idea and then I'll just basically use everybody else's characters and words to make it come true. It just destroys everything that I believe in. I absolutely hate the idea of AI books.
Yeah. So do you think this is gonna impact what you're doing. I mean, we're talking about creativity, right? Because I mean, even like, I'm not like creative like you. I write a shorter poem because that's something that I enjoy, just to get my mind out of like whatever I do every day, right? So when I do that, my channel of publishing, it could be Facebook, right? Just to share with my friends. People know me that because I've been doing this for a long time, since I was a kid. But if you don't know, people said, was it AI? You feel like, you're heartbroken because you're putting so much effort into this, right? Writing something that you really enjoy, that you want to share with your loved one. And then they respond back and say, well, like, did you use AI, right? How do you feel like, this
Oh,
whole...
look, it is really concerning because I know the publishers are being absolutely swamped with AI books, but the publishing system is such a mess. See, Amazon is kind of like the gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about Amazon is it works off algorithms. And as you guys know, you can fool algorithms. So what people do is they pay to get 5-star reviews. So there's actually review houses where people are just writing reviews of books. They've never read the books. They're never going to, but they're just writing down a few things that will get to push it up the algorithm. And then even worse than that is sock puppeting. Have you heard of that one?
No. What is it?
So sock puppeting is when is the really dark side of that. It's even worse than paying for 5-star reviews. It's when you deliberately post 1-star reviews for your competition.
Oh my goodness.
So, but obviously it's not under your name. You create these fake accounts, like that your puppets, if you will, which is where the sock puppeting comes from, that all seem to be saying the same thing.
Yeah.
That
So
are
people
all,
believe, right?
well, not just that. It fools the algorithm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, like if you're in a certain category and all of a sudden your books are getting heaps of paid 5-star reviews, and the most successful books in that category are getting lots of 1-star reviews, they get pushed down.
Yeah, it changes the ranking.
It changes the ranking. And it's just so deceitful. And the one, like, some are caught and of course quite rightly are then basically thrown out of the publishing world. But it goes on all the time.
Is there anything you can do to protect? Like, what are you doing going forward, or is it just you just have to?
No, well, the way to change it is for Amazon to change its algorithms and to get away, like, so to maybe get it so that you can't just have these sock puppets pushing somebody else down.
Higher verification.
Yeah, there's got to be higher verification. But like, see, AI, like it's like white noise. Because if you, it's not like in the old days when there was a lot of bookstores and you're able to go in your local bookstore and you could speak to staff or the manager and you say, look, I like fantasy. What's good that's just come out?
Yeah.
Now you go on Amazon and you go, let's have a look at fantasy books, and there's a gazillion of them, and you don't know which ones are good, really, because you can't trust the system. You don't know which ones are AI. Like, there's it is ridiculous, and I can't see a way out of that. I mean, books will still rise out of that mess. And that will still happen, and I still believe that, that I'll be able to write one that will, and then everything else will take off there as well. But all I can do is just keep writing something that I believe in and feel passionate about.
That's it.
And then see if it strikes a chord.
Yeah. So Duncan, I mean, that's a really good discussion. So you pretty much use your experience and into your books. That's how I see it. And then add more characters. Just to share that experience in a way. So, if you don't mind, can we can you take us to like your early days, right? So you're talking about coming here when you're doing high school, but before that, like as a Duncan Lay, as a young kid,
Well,
what's
books,
your,
books
if you don't
saved
mind?
me. Books saved me. That's the short answer. Books and writing saved me. We spent about 3 years in housing commission in the UK. Like I had a childhood that I didn't enjoy. Look, I was never hit. I was never hungry. I was never cold. But I was, I suppose, mentally manipulated into thinking that I wasn't really worthwhile. In the UK, there's obviously you probably know that there's quite a private school system, and
Yep.
the private school system, I guess, is similar to Sri Lanka,
Yep.
is the way to get to success.
Yep. Yep.
That's where you make the connections that make you. And we didn't have the money. I was offered actually 2 full scholarships to private schools, and both times my father turned them down,
Wow.
even though he had gone to a private school himself. And as I said, I wasn't allowed to go to university. I had a situation, I guess, where, yeah, I felt worthless in a lot of ways, that I was never going to be good enough. And like when my parents divorced, I was 7, and my sister and I lived with our mother in housing commission. And then when I was about 10, I went to live with my father and stepmother. And my mother, she made it clear that we were cramping her style a bit, and that she was quite happy. Well, I don't know, she was quite happy, but to a 10-year-old me, she was quite happy to hand us over.
Yeah.
That we were a hindrance to her life, and so I guess that gets into you a little bit, that you think, well, your own mother was willing to give you up. There must be something seriously, fundamentally wrong with you there.
And you and your sister that time,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
That there's something worthless about. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am worthless. That there is
The doubts start to creep in.
Yeah, absolutely. That you're only 10. Like your emotional intelligence is very, very raw at that
And you're
age.
so depending on your parents.
Yeah, exactly. And you think they must know best. And then my father had this Walter Mitty kind of persona. He said he used to do amateur acting. Like my aunt was a serious actress. She appeared in a couple of the Carry On movies
Okay.
in the UK, and she was a West End actress. Like
So this is your dad's sister?
yeah, my father's sister, and he told me that he'd done work with the Royal Shakespeare Company in England and stuff like this, and later on it turns out that he'd paid to do a course there in the summer.
So maybe he's living in a fantasy.
Yeah, exactly.
life
Yeah,
himself,
there
right?
was a lot of fantasy there. Yeah, but yeah, there was a lot of me that didn't think I was really worthwhile, and like you get when you get told you're a little bastard and stuff like that. Well, when you're a kid, you start to believe it. And to me, books and writing were an escape, and I had to escape from a reality I wasn't enjoying, and to bring it back full circle to the quest for success. To me, success was giving my children a childhood that I wanted, and giving them what I felt that I'd missed out on. Yeah. And to me, that was to course, you'd have to interview them to make sure that
Yeah.
that it worked, but hopefully it did. That they are, you know, well adjusted and were able to go to university and were never felt that their opinions were worthless or that they were worthless.
Yeah.
And that to me is the highest mark of success. And that healed a lot of things with me from there. I know you've spoken about earlier about how important Michelle was for you and that trust there. And likewise, like with my wife Belinda, that to feel that someone like that could actually love you, well then
Absolutely.
there must be something in me that's worthwhile after all. And it was, as I said, I mean, look, some people have like unbelievably horrible childhoods where they're abused physically, sexually, where they're starving on the streets and everything like that. I was never that bad, but you know, it did mess with my mind.
Yeah, and I like you see a lot in the media about, you know, harassment and sexual abuse and things like that. But I think it's also important not to downplay just how bad like that mental manipulation can be, because it's invisible, right?
Yes.
And you don't often hear about it, but it takes just as big a toll on someone, and especially a young person. You know, that's when you're molding your self-identity, and just to hear someone who should be so important to you, you know, put you down like that, and it has incredible impact. So I think, you know, it's very selfless of you, you know, to want to improve that for your kids. I think that's, you know, such a high mark on your name, and you should be really proud of that. I just wanted to kind of go back because, you know, considering, you know, your parents maybe weren't the role models that you wanted, was there anyone like along your journey who you looked up to and really helped you on your journey?
Yeah. Look, I mean, my stepmother, who tragically died very young, she was only 53, which is my age now. She was probably the closest thing to an actual real parent that I had. But I think, again, books were the things that really stepped up to the mark there for me, and characters in books, and trying to because it wasn't just fantasy. I mean, I read very widely, but the idea, I mean, the typical, the classic character arc is you meet somebody, they're in either a bad place and they slowly come good, or in a good place something goes catastrophically wrong and then they've got to come back from that. And either of those sort of paths, that sort of character arc where slowly they put themselves together, like that to me was very powerful, and that was something that I guess gave me hope that that I could do that. And it's funny when I say that I was thinking these things when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and yet I was, I guess, because what was happening externally, I wasn't too keen on participating in.
Yeah.
So I went into books to find,
look up to those characters on these books.
to find a better reality for myself, I suppose. And so I mean, like characters. I loved the characters. Like I spoke about Watership Down. The character in there, Hazel. He's not the best fighter. He's not the smartest, but he has a vision and he sees a way forward and he brings others along with him. And something like that to me really spoke to me. The characters of David Gemmell, although I started reading him when I was a little bit older, when I was 15, again, that really sort of blew my mind that the character in his first book, Wreck, is he's a berserker, but when he's not going crazy, he's a bit of a coward, and he's not a typical hero, and he's like that. Again, that was to me, that was wow. You can have a hero who isn't heroic all the time, and yeah, it just, each one of those things sort of opened my mind, I guess, a little bit more, and made me think, well, there's hope there for me that I can change myself and build myself into something, because I didn't have a lot of self-worth, and it's it's been a long journey, and I think that again, coming back to children, like that was very healing for me to you don't have to give your kids, I feel, you don't have to give your kids every new gadget or to give them the most amazing toys. You give them the most precious gift that you can, which is your time. And I said my conscious decision is that there is nothing, when I'm at home, there is nothing I am doing that is more important than what they want me to do. And if I keep that in mind all the time, then I feel like I can't go wrong. So yeah, that's where I guess I healed a lot of myself through them.
And like I hope this isn't too deep, but given your upbringing, were you ever hesitant to have children? Like I've heard from a lot of people, like I have a few friends who had a troubled childhood, and it's almost put them off having kids because they don't want to perpetuate the same thing onto their children.
I actually went the other way. To me, it was more important than anything. That I felt that was a missing part of me, and the only way I could replace that was by having children and giving them what I wanted and what I felt that I missed out on.
Maybe you found that missing part when you came here to Australia. Meeting Belinda, associating with. How did you find that change? Coming from UK to Australia. Obviously, that was positive, right?
Absolutely, it was a huge thing, because it enabled all of that baggage that I'd carried with me, I could leave behind in the UK. You could just remake yourself, because you walked into a new country, nobody knew you, so you could be who you wanted to be. One of my younger stepsisters changed her name.
Okay.
So her full name's Christina. In the UK, she'd be known as Tina, but she hated it. When she came out to Australia, she said, "I'm now Chrissy." And it was such a simple thing, and yet it changed her whole outlook.
Yep.
She could leave Tina behind.
Reinvent yourself.
And reinvent herself. And in a lot of ways, that's what I did too. All the things that dragged me down, you could put behind you. And because nobody knew who you were, nobody had known any of the mistakes you made, or the foolish things that you'd said, or the things that you had done that you regretted. They were all gone. It was basically you flipped the whiteboard over and started again.
Yep. Yep.
And
it's the perfect place to do it. The convicts as well come here for a fresh start.
Yeah. Exactly. And what would have happened to me if I'd stayed in the UK? I mean, I just don't know. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't have met Belinda. what would I have done? Where would I have gone? It was funny because up till then, books and writing had always been like my escape, my hobby. But like my father was into computers, which in the 1980s was
Yep.
quite sort of visionary, and so I was expected to sort of follow in his footsteps and do something with computers. And I did computer studies at school, and I was okay at that, but it wasn't something that I was passionate about, like yourself.
Exactly me. Yeah.
And when I came out to Australia, we started school because the English year is different. It starts in September, ends in July, because obviously Northern Hemisphere summer. So we came out. I started school in Australia at the end of September, and I was in year 10, and I had the year 10 exams in like 8 weeks' time. And obviously I'd done none of their curriculum.
Yeah.
The studies, the exams I did really well in were things like English and history, where you could write. And that was just instant clarification for me. I was like, well, obviously this is what I'm good at.
Yeah, and I remember Michelle was saying, like she was the kind of the golden girl in school. As soon as you came over, like you became the ducks of the that year. She kind of like no more the best, So yeah, so I mean, you were a very bright and smart kid, and I guess that time you realized, hey, I am worth it, right? Like I'm not just a
yeah. I mean, but the good thing about it was I still had that self-awareness because I'd been in the UK, I'd been at a school with some kids that were incredibly smart. Like, I mean, my HSC scores, I think, put me in like the top 3%,
Wow.
which is good. But like I'd been to school with some kids who would have been in like the top 0.5%. So like I was aware that I was really good at the subjects I was good at, but I wasn't, like a world beater in everything. And so it enabled me to put a little bit of perspective onto things there. But yeah, look, absolutely, getting ducks of your minor high did. Again, it's a bit of validation.
Absolutely,
And everyone needs a little bit of validation in their lives.
Absolutely.
So yeah, of course that did help. That was a real turning point coming to Australia and not entirely reinventing myself because it wasn't like an overnight thing. It was, I guess, a fork in the road, and I started on the path that has led me to where I am today. So it wasn't like, oh, right, I'm in Australia, great, everything is wonderful now. It was, an opportunity to start taking that first step.
Yeah. Look, we could talk for ages. I just looked down and it's been over an hour. We've
really?
been talking.
Wow.
So we should probably start to wrap it up. But one thing that, I want to close on is going back to your definition of success. Looking back at your journey now, do you feel like you're successful?
Yes. Look, I would love more success with the books, just because I feel so passionate about them that I feel that there are a lot of kids out there who are like me and need something positive to cling on to and need that escape.
Yeah.
And I think that my books could do that for a lot of people. But in terms of where I was when I flew into Australia to where I am now, yeah, absolutely, that's a success. And I look at my family, and I look at friends in my life, and I feel very proud of how far I've come.
Yeah, and so you should.
Yeah, Duncan, I mean, this is amazing. I mean, this is what we do normally, right? We sit down and talk hours and hours, right? So, but you open up some stuff that I never kind of knew. Thank you so much being honest and being open. If someone wants to kind of read these books, um, what's the easiest way?
Well,
Yeah.
I have a website, so you
Yeah.
can just Google my name and
Duncan Lay. Yeah.
Duncan Lay, Lay, and that will give you information on all of the books. Now, it's been a few years since some of them were published, so it would be, some of them are still on shelves, but some of them you'd have to order, or ebooks. And funnily enough, I get more money out of an ebook than I
Really?
do out of a printed book.
Wow.
Yes, I get a
Crazy.
bigger share because there's less people have got their
Yeah.
fingers in that
Less
pie.
touches. Yeah.
So I actually make more money out of ebooks. And look, I've got no problem with people with ebooks, and if that's the way that people like to read. But yeah, go to the website and they'll tell you everything you need to know.
Awesome.
And other than that, just Google it, or ask about it in your local bookstore.
Awesome. And I like to, kind of wrap up some of the key takeaways from our discussion. And I think there's been, 2 or 3 really big ones which have been touched on over and over. And I think the first one is just like this constant imagination. In everything you've talked about, it's always coming from your imagination, and you want your kids to be more imaginative and see things from different perspectives. And I think coming at it from that lens, as you said, imagination is becoming more of a rare thing these days.
Yes.
And so I think that is, for me at least, one of your key traits which has probably led to some of your success, is being able to see things from a different lens and always imagining a new thing. And as you said, imagining a new life for yourself through some of your characters. So I think that's an important one. And then you touched on it briefly, but you strive for quality. You talked about a lot of early stage authors can just rush through and publish something, but it's kind of the 80-20 rule, right? You can do 80% of the work in 20% of the time, but it's that last little bit that makes all the difference. So I think that drive for quality is another one. And then also, we've heard it so many times, but always learning. As you said, knowledge is at our fingertips now. Always learning about things from the past, history, and as you said, making sure it doesn't repeat itself, and really diving into
imagination and curiosity. Like,
Okay.
if you've got a curiosity about the world and what's going on, like Jem and I were talking earlier about what's happening in Sri Lanka with the political situation, and I'm endlessly fascinated by what's going on around the world.
Yeah.
And I think that if you have that curiosity and you're willing to open your mind, then amazing things can happen.
Yeah, for sure. And the last one I just put down, I think you have a real humility and you do a lot of self-reflection.
Authenticity.
Yeah,
I would say.
authenticity. And that goes into your books as well. You're taking lessons from yourself and opening up, and it flows through into your work.
It's funny. I feel like I didn't get many things from my father, but funnily enough, that was one of them, because I saw somebody who didn't have that self-awareness, who swanned around thinking that he was the most wonderful person in the world and made up stories to prove that, even when they weren't true. So I think that I refused to go down that path, and that's a conscious decision every day.
Yeah.
That I have to be self-aware, and I have to see what is the reality of me and the world around me. And so yes, that was it was an unwitting gift from him, but it was still a gift.
Yeah,
yes.
definitely. And I think another takeaway, especially for me from this discussion, is really the importance of books. I think it's kind of being lost on the new generation. At least for me, it's something that my dad's always wanted me to read, and I never really got into it until lately. And then also we were at the Dimmicks Children charity, and just to see them talk about some of the impacts that just giving a kid a book, how big an impact it has on people's lives. So I think for me, that's been another big
Absolutely,
takeaway,
yeah,
just for you to share your story on how important books
Well,
were for
it's
your
it's
development.
kind of like, you know, that classic saying where they say, you know, give a man a fish and he
Yeah.
can eat for a day, but teach him to fish and he'll never be hungry again. It's like that with a child. Like if you play them a video on YouTube, they'll be happy for an hour. But if you give them a book, you will open their mind for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, your story, Dimex Children Charities would love it. Because this is exactly what they're trying to prove, like, you know, what they're trying to do. You know, there's so many underprivileged kids, believe it or not, in Australia.
Oh, yeah,
they
absolutely.
never had a brand new book. So this is exactly the objective of this charity. And your story, right? You're pretty much your life changed by books, right?
So you don't even need a new book.
No, yeah.
You need, like I used to go to the library all the time, and there's a funny thing that we used to walk past a cafe that roasted its own coffee, and the smell of roasting coffee is actually so powerful to me because it unlocks the memory of going to the library and getting books every 2 weeks. So yeah, it's funny. Like I always start the day with a coffee. I only have one coffee a day, first thing in the morning. But I guess that then just reinforces
sets
that
you up.
memory to me, thinking about writing and imagination and books.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, Duncan. I mean, I tell you what, we are so proud of you. You know what you achieved.
Thank you, man.
And on that note, we'll wrap up there. If you could follow us at the Quest for Success Pod and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.